maintaining or restoring the rule of law. My country, Georgia, can only share the plight of the Ukrainian people that we have experienced in our turn. Before Bucha, there was Abkhazia, is the title of a film. And yes, before the war against Ukraine, there was a war against Georgia. That's why
impedes the movement of food and inputs that are necessary for food production. We also, Mr. Chairman, underscored the importance of communication and outreach strategy that informs the consequences of this war on food security globally. I mean, many participants did not, for example, understand the impact of this war far away in different continents until this was brought to their attention in the discussion that we had. And therefore, it is necessary for us to have as much information on the table as we can, and that the effects of war were not just limited to Europe. We have serious consequences of war also
Peace Summit. It will start the process of achieving sustainable peace in Europe. We are here to support Ukraine and President Zelensky's plan for peace, a just and lasting peace. Let us not forget that Russia's aggression against Ukraine started not in 2022, much earlier, in 2014, with the occupation of and illegal annexation of Crimea and with the invasion into eastern Ukraine. Russia's full-scale war of aggression against Ukraine violates all principles of the UN Charter. No country has any right of veto over the sovereign choices of the independent and democratic states. Our collective obligation to stand in full solidarity with Ukraine in this extremely challenging task, whatever Ukraine's victory takes. Today, once again, I would like to stress that peace in Ukraine can only be achieved through the full restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity. For this to happen, Russia must cease its aggression immediately and completely and unconditionally withdraw all its forces and military equipment from Ukraine. Calling on Ukraine to surrender, to compromise on its sovereignty and territorial integrity, or to accept Russia's ultimatums would serve only to appease Russia and invite it to continue the war. It's difficult to call this support to the aggressor as alternative plans for peace. There will be no lasting and sustainable peace without ensuring justice. Those responsible for atrocious war crimes and the crime of aggression, which constitutes a gross breach of the UN Charter, should be brought to account. To ensure this, we are seeking to establish a special international tribunal. I call on the participants of this summit to join it. And my final point, which I would like to mention, the international community should ensure peace is sustainable. We all should agree on the mechanism of how to contain Russia from new aggressions in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, President Nauseda. I am now delighted to hand over the floor to the President of Malta, Miriam Spiteri de Bono.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, on behalf of the Republic of Malta, I commend the initiative taken by Switzerland in hosting this summit with the aim of bringing together members of the international community in order to pursue our shared interest in the achievement of a just and lasting peace for Ukraine and its people. In this regard, this occasion provides the opportunity to reaffirm that peace can only be possible if it is based on the tenets of international law and the UN Charter. This is the cornerstone of multilateralism, a multilateralism based on the mutual respect amongst nations, the upholding of international law and the UN Charter. These principles are the basis of this attempt to achieve and protect the territorial integrity of Ukraine and the independence and sovereignty of its people. This code of procedure, the upholding of the principles that are commonly and crucially important for all nations, will remain at the heart of Malta's efforts to contribute to the achievement of a just and lasting peace for the Ukrainian people, and includes efforts by Malta in its current role as a member of the United Nations Security Council. Based on this conviction, I confirm my country's full backing of the objective to work towards reaching a common starting point that will lead towards the creation of a comprehensive framework for peace. It is essential that this initiative strives to bring on board all parties committing to seeking peace by diplomacy above all other means. A successful peace process needs the support of all global partners, guided by a common vision of fully restoring Ukraine's inherent sovereign rights. While looking towards a peaceful future, we should not lose sight of the suffering brought on by a war that has been increasingly characterized by civilians being merely seen as collateral damage. It is our collective duty to ensure that assistance reaches all those in need in Ukraine and beyond, and all those who have been affected by these acts of aggression in one way or another. Today is an important step forward to achieve our aim. The summit should be the foundation of future meetings with the aim of securing peace for Ukraine and its people. We gathered here today are steadfast in our aims of achieving a just and peaceful international order, and particularly a just and peaceful peace for the current situation in Ukraine. This strong message must be clearly communicated to the Russian Federation and to all other states that through their actions challenge our shared set of values. Thank you.
Madam President, thank you very much. I'm now pleased to invite Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, to share his thoughts.
Colleagues, this process started a year ago with 15 national security advisors. Today, we are gathered here with over 90 countries, half of the United Nations member states, from all parts of the world, including Asia, Africa, the Middle East, the Americas, and Europe. This shows that the war against Ukraine is truly now a global issue. And we all know we are only at the beginning of a path to peace. And in spite of us around this table having, yes, sometimes different opinions on how to exactly get to peace for Ukraine, let there be no mistake. We are totally united, have a shared vision on principles, on values, on decency. You do not invade another country. You do not abduct children. You do not play politics with the world food supply. And you do not endanger nuclear safety. Volodymyr, this gathering sends a strong signal to the people of Ukraine. A signal that not only the people of Ukraine want peace, but all of us gathered here want peace. This meeting sends a maybe even stronger signal to Putin. And to him, I would like to say this. Many around this table have said that Russia should have been here today, and I fully agree. You should have been here. We need Russia to participate. But the strong message of today is that peace is only possible if Russia abides by the basic rules and values which apply to all of us. Let us not forget, this is why we together founded the United Nations in 1945. Today is the start of a process, the start of a path to peace. There will be many obstacles on this path, but united, we will get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister Rutte. I'm now delighted to give the floor to the Prime Minister of Italy and G7 President, Giorgia Meloni.
Thank you very much. Good morning, dear Viola, dear Volodymyr, colleagues. 844 days have passed since the beginning of the Russian war of aggression. 844 days of heroic Ukrainian resistance and of an unwearying unity which never failed to support the Ukrainian people. Defending Ukraine means defending that system of rules that holds the international community together and protects every nation. If Ukraine had not been able to count on our support and therefore would have been forced to surrender, today we would not be here to discuss the minimum conditions for a negotiation. We would be just discussing the invasion of a sovereign state, and we can all imagine with what consequences. Dear colleagues, peace does not mean surrender, as President Putin seems to suggest with his latest declarations. It does not. Confusing peace with subjugation would set a dangerous precedent for everyone. Today's conference represents a bold initiative which dismantles certain narrative or propaganda. No one can question the absolute importance of the three crucial topics of global interest which have been discussed today: nuclear safety, food security, and the human dimension, in particular, the return of displaced children. They matter us all, and I think also from today's discussion that there is much we can build from here. Italy has always done its part, and it does not intend to walk away. However, we need to join all our possible efforts in order to help Ukraine look towards the future. That's exactly what we did at the G7 summit under the Italian presidency, where we just reached an agreement to make approximately USD 50 billion of additional financial support available to Kyiv by the end of the year, leveraging the extraordinary revenues of the immobilized Russian sovereign assets. This is an extremely significant achievement, the result of a great teamwork done by the G7 leader. So, dear Volodymyr, I'm here to tell you that you can continue to count on us for as long as it takes. We will continue every possible effort to keep all the international partners engaged, as they are also suffering from the global consequences of this conflict. We intend to do everything in our possibilities to transform a future of peace and freedom for Ukraine into reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister Meloni. It is my pleasure to ask the Taoiseach of Ireland, Simon Harris, to give his address.
Thank you so much, and I really want to thank our Swiss hosts for bringing us together today, and I want to thank you, President Zelensky, Volodymyr, for your leadership, for your resilience right throughout this period of time. As we meet, the situation on the ground in Ukraine is extremely grave. Given Russia's relentless aggression, it may seem as if the prospect of a just peace is very far off. But it is important, nonetheless, that we as a global community are clear about the principles that must underpin it when it does come. We are all stakeholders in the global order, and the issues at stake in Ukraine are universal. International law, the principles of the United Nations Charter, these must apply at all times, in all places, and to all of us. Global security and stability depend on it. All nations represented here today have signed up to the principles set out in the UN Charter, including respect for sovereignty. These principles represent the strongest protection we have as independent, free countries. Ukraine holds the same rights to its territorial integrity and sovereignty as the rest of us. If we do not insist upon it for Ukraine, we cannot expect it for ourselves. If we revert to all nations represented here today have signed up to the principles set out in the UN Charter, including respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. These principles represent the strongest protection we have as independent, free countries. Ukraine holds the same rights to its territorial integrity and sovereignty as the rest of us. If we do not insist upon it for Ukraine, we cannot expect it for ourselves. If we revert to a global system where the organising principle is might is right, the independence we enjoy today as free nations will be at serious risk. This is an existential issue. When I say us, I mean everyone: European, African, Latin American and Asian. We are all subjects to the rule of international law and international humanitarian law, and we must all be protected by it. Unfortunately, conflict in Ukraine is not unique. Across the world we see instability and conflict. We cannot sit at a peace summit and ignore that reality. The world has rightly been horrified by the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. We must see an immediate ceasefire. We must see an end to the violence. Unhindered and unimpeded humanitarian aid must enter, and all hostages must be released. We have seen the horror and human suffering in Sudan. Millions of people have been displaced and dispossessed in places like Syria and Congo. In working to end conflict and to bring peace about, we must be consistent in our approach and loyal to the global rules to which we have committed ourselves. That is why it is especially dispiriting to have Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine characterised as something that should uniquely preoccupy Europe, that it is something that should pit the global south and north against each other. We cannot afford a rule in which double standards apply and where some are held accountable when they flout international law. There is a simple truth. Russia has illegally invaded Ukraine. It continues to subject its people to brutal and unrelenting attack. It has committed innumerable crimes against humanity, including the killing and abduction of children. It continues to attack civilians and civilian infrastructure in an attempt to break the will of the Ukrainian people and to render their home uninhabitable. The consequences of the invasion have been felt far beyond Europe. Russia has weaponized food exports. I want to pay tribute to the work of the UN Secretary-General and of countries in the region to keep maritime channels in the Black Sea open. Its illegal invasion was a driver of the energy price shock that drove inflation around the world. In coming here today, we are saying that international law must prevail. We are saying we stand with Ukraine now and for as long as it takes. And finally, I welcome the focus of this summit on the thousands upon thousands of Ukrainian children who have been forcibly removed and abducted from their homes, taken from their parents. Crimes against civilians, particularly children, are especially unconscionable. And I know that all of us support efforts to return these children to their families and communities, and we stand with Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Taoiseach. As next speaker, may I call the President of Portugal, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa.
Madam President, congratulations for this summit. Dear colleagues, this summit is in itself already an impressive success. The world is here. It is a real global summit for peace, because Russia's unprovoked aggression against Ukraine has brought up upon us a global war, not just an European one. And peace in Ukraine will be a global peace, founded on UN Charter, international law, humanitarian law, multilateralism, nuclear safety, and sustainable development for all. The road to fair and lasting peace is starting now. And with the formula for peace and this decisive summit, the road ahead will be unstoppable. EU membership, full reconstruction, stability in Europe, and a strong message of international cooperation and solidarity in the world. Portugal maintains its unwavering commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and will continue to provide assistance to its government and people. History has called upon us, and we must take concrete steps and bring new partners, all parties that should have come today to this process. It is urgent, very urgent, to deliver a just and lasting peace for our citizens, for our people, for the future of our nations and for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your short and clear comment. I'm now pleased to invite Prime Minister of Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, to give his address.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, a year ago it was not obvious that this peace conference would take place. Certainly, Russia did everything it could in order to prevent it from happening, yet today 101 countries and international organizations are represented around this table, demonstrating, as the Prime Minister of Netherlands said, that this is indeed, the war in Ukraine is indeed a global issue. For various reasons. Probably the most important one, which was discussed in our breakout sessions, the question of food security. When we hear the President of Kenya mentioning the impact of the availability and price of fertilizers has had on its own farmers, we understand the tremendous implications of this war on global food security. And of course, I would like to express my satisfaction that in the conclusions in the joint communiqué, we have highlighted the importance of maintaining free and full and safe commercial navigation and supporting Ukraine in order to protect its ports and its infrastructures. I was with Volodymyr in Odessa when a Russian missile actually struck the port. And the protection of Ukrainian infrastructure is absolutely critical in maintaining the level of Ukrainian exports, which in turn are absolutely critical in order to maintain global prices of food. The second and probably most important reason why this war has become a global issue is the fact that we're all here to demonstrate our commitment to a rules-based international order, to confirm the primacy of the UN Charter, to send a very clear message that sovereignty must be respected, that borders cannot be changed by force, that international rules and norms must be upheld, that countries and people have a right to choose their own form of government and determine their own destiny and their own future, that nuclear safety cannot be endangered, that food cannot be weaponized. We speak about a just and lasting peace, but I think we can all agree around this table that this peace cannot be a result of Ukrainian capitulation. And that is why Greece, with many other countries, will continue to support Ukraine to defend itself in order to get to the point of having a credible negotiation reaching a just and lasting peace. Finally, let me stress the importance of compliance with international humanitarian law and international human rights law. This is an absolute priority, not just in Ukraine, but in Gaza, in Sudan. We must, above all, prioritize the protection of civilian population, ensure the safe return of unlawfully deported or forcibly transferred children, as well as the release of unlawfully detained civilians and the further exchange of prisoners of war. Again, congratulations for making this peace conference a reality.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now I invite the President of Ecuador, Daniel Noboa, to take the floor.
Dear colleagues, I want to start my statement in the closing plenary by expressing my recognition and appreciation to Switzerland for organizing this summit as a space to share and converge on our shared commitment to peace and international cooperation towards reaching a lasting peace between Russia and Ukraine. My participation in this summit has three main objectives. First of all, to reiterate that Ecuador respects and abides by the principles and objectives of the United Nations Charter and of the international law. This is a paramount principle upheld by my government and by the Ecuadorian people that will be strictly observed. Secondly, my participation in this summit is guided by the will of my government to promote the peaceful resolution of international conflicts, and to do with special urgency in the case that we are dealing here, due to the severe impact on the whole world. Ecuador is committed to actively promote a peaceful solution to this devastating conflict. Thirdly, Ecuador has the obligation in this summit to make a strong call to the international community for dialogue and negotiation as the only pathway to reconciliation and lasting peace, which is the only way that we will put end to the human suffering, loss of lives, and destruction. We firmly believe that a peaceful solution is achievable, so let us not underestimate the transformative power of dialogue and cooperation. We must focus on concrete steps to build trust and foster reconciliation. Finally, allow me to once more reiterate that Ecuador acknowledges the complex challenges posed by this conflict. So we will work together alongside the international community to achieve a future where peace and prosperity prevail, building a better world for generations to come. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I'm now pleased to invite the chairman of the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Denis Bećirović, to share her thoughts. She seems not to be in the room, so let's go ahead. I am now asking the Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Store, to share his thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and let me agree with the President of Portugal. This summit is a success. The whole world is here. At least we are representative for those countries who stand by international law and the immense value to protect states and thereby protect people. I'd also like to express thanks to Switzerland for organizing this huge gathering, and President Zelensky, to you and your team for persevering, traveling around, being present. It is impressive. Very shortly, I think why this meeting is such a success is that we are addressing this issue. What do we do when such an aggression not only causes havoc on the people and the nation, but really tears down principles that we all depend on? So we are affected. Norway, like Finland and like Estonia, are bordering Russia. So we have a neighbor that has really major way attacked another neighbor. So what do we do? Well, in a way, we have to come and build back better. Unite around the principles of humanitarian law, Charter of the UN, and I think our statement from this meeting, in principle, is very important, in addition to addressing, Mr. Zelensky, your key peace formula, this time on food security, nuclear safety, and the human dimension. So leaving Switzerland, we have to ask ourselves, what's next? What are we doing tomorrow morning? Well, we are starting on the road towards the next summit that the President has envisioned. And let me just share a few points on that. We have to be wise and smart. We have to maintain this unity of so many states. You can count on us. Norway will be supporting Ukraine, your right to defense, but also in your civil areas. We have today unleashed a package to support your building back of electricity systems, so that there will be electricity for the hospitals of Kharkiv, and that there will be safety for those key services. And we will continue to support you on bringing back your children. There are big issues and small issues, but the big issue here is that one child that is missing. So we really have to work on that. And then I think, finally, there can be no double language on international law and the Charter of the UN. It is one language. And that's why we have to be principled on the Middle East, on Gaza, on Sudan, and the rest of the world. So, Mr. President, we will be with you on that next phase. You have to continue to engage with us on how to make a next summit successful. And after this summit, I feel just more inspired that we will succeed on that road. Slava Ukraina.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now I invite the President of Slovenia, Nataša Pirc-Musar, to take the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to start with congratulating the Swiss Confederation and President Viola Amherd and Ukraine and the President Volodymyr Zelensky for their efforts to jointly organize this important summit. The fact that there are here so many of us speaks volumes about the commitment of the international community to end this blatant violation of virtually all international legal norms that we are witnessing in the Russian aggression against Ukraine. For Slovenia, it is an honor to participate in this diplomatic effort, and as I have already announced in a recorded statement, my country is motivated and ready to actively contribute to the continuation of the process that should lead to the kind of peace that Ukraine, as a victim of aggression, wants and has the right to want. And now just allow me a couple of words which are from my legal soul. Who is the permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations? 5 countries which were the winners in the Second World War, Russia among them. The assurance was that those countries are going to take care of peace and security of the whole planet. Is Russia fulfilling this duty? No, it's not. Why the fight in Russia is so important? Russia is not only fighting for, freedom and sovereignty of its own country. Russia is fighting basically for the whole planet to respect the international law. You know the saying, Ukraine. If Russia stops fighting, the war is over. If Ukraine stops fighting, that's the end of Ukraine, but I will add, that's the end of the rule of law, the end of the international rule of law. There are currently 55 armed conflicts around the globe, the highest number after the Second World War. There are 193 members of the United Nations, 206 members of the International Olympic Committee. It's easier to get into the IOC than to the UN sometimes. So that means that there are approximately 412 leaders around this globe who are in charge of 8 billion people on planet Earth. Are we aware of this obligation that we have on our shoulders? I think that the countries and the heads of states and the prime ministers and other officials which are gathered here are aware of that obligation. And everybody here knows that the international law is at stake. And I would just like to conclude with one sentence. We have to discuss with other countries as well, China included, Russia, of course. And I don't expect that everybody will be in the same team, either Team Ukraine or, if you want, Team Palestine, Team Israel, Team Russia. I want us to be in Team Humanity, for God's sake. This is what we have to do for the generations behind. This is the reason why I will say at the end, Slava Ukraini, because you are defending the international law. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Allow me now to get one voice back again to the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Mr. Denis Bečirović, the floor is yours.
Respected Excellencies, first of all, I want to thank Her Excellency Viola Amherd, the President of the Swiss Confederation, for taking over the role of host and for the excellent organization of this important summit. Support for Ukraine means support on protecting international law and the basic principle on which the civilized world is based. The state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, as a victim of brutal aggression from 1992 to 1995, fully understands the suffering and hardship of the citizens of Ukraine. Unfortunately, once again, Europe is facing policy of territorial expansionism. The ultimate goal of the wars of aggression against Bosnia and Herzegovina and Ukraine is the same, that of territorial expansion. That is why one of the messages from my country read, learn from Sarajevo, save Kyiv. I believe that a just, lasting peace in Ukraine has no alternative. Russia's aggression against Ukraine in the previous 28 months has caused terrible consequences. Bosnia and Herzegovina, after the start of Russian aggression, has aligned itself with the position of the European Union and firmly expressed its support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. My country regularly aligns with statements, initiatives and decisions condemning Russian aggression. The free world, among other things, has two important tasks. First, to help the people of Ukraine to defend their country. The second, not to allow Russia to cause a new war on the European continent and thus divert attention from the aggression against Ukraine. Let's not forget, these two tasks are related. Therefore, I must warn that pro-Russian forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina are threatening the peace. The authorities of Bosnian and Herzegovinian entity, Republika Srpska, with the open support of Russia, are jeopardizing the Dayton Peace Agreement and threatening the stability of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the region. Therefore, I call on the free is more important today than ever. For Ukraine to win, solidarity must win over state egoism. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Excellency. As next speaker, may I invite the President of Montenegro, Jakov Milatovic, to give his address.
Thank you, Chairman. Dear President Amher, dear President Zelensky, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is of extreme importance that we have gathered today in Burgenstock in such a great number. And I would like to commend Switzerland for managing to convene this important event and having us together trying to map out first steps towards peace in Ukraine. And it is both an honor and a duty for all of us, the leaders from around the world, to stand united on this important matter. Our yesterday's and today's gathering reflect our commitment to seek a path to peace. And the precondition to peace is clear. We must continue to provide firm support to Ukraine against the unjustified aggression from Russia. In the Balkans, we have seen the devastating consequences of nationalism and territorial aggression. The scars of such conflicts endure for generations, leaving behind a legacy of suffering and instability. Montenegro today, as a member of NATO and a forthcoming member of the EU, has stood by Ukraine from the very day one. We have offered political, military, and humanitarian aid and opened our doors to more Ukrainians per capita than any other country in the world. Firmly believing that the path to peace must be based on the Charter of the United Nations and international law, Montenegro actively supports all the efforts of the international community that are undertaken toward this goal in various formats. Dear colleagues, as a father of three, I'm deeply concerned by thousands of Ukrainian kids forcibly transferred to Russia or Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine. Although many obstacles are created to prevent them from being reunited with their parents and with their homeland, we all at this table need to do more so that children of Ukraine are back in Ukraine. Dear Excellencies, at the end, once again, we reaffirmed our commitment to the values enshrined in our own constitutions, which are freedom, liberty, and independence. And Ukraine is on the front line defending these ideals. Let us unite in action and determination for the future of peace in Europe and for the future of peace across the world. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, thank you very much. It is my pleasure to hand over the floor to Vice Prime Minister of Sweden, Ebba Busch.
Thank you, Excellencies, colleagues, friends. First of all, Switzerland and President Viola, thank you for bringing us all together. Thank you, President Zelensky, for initiating this. And once again, dear Volodymyr, it was an honor to once again have you and your team on Swedish soil just a few weeks ago, together with the presidents and prime minister of the Nordic countries, supporting Ukraine in exercising its inherent right to self-defense is now Sweden's main foreign policy priority. The disadvantage of speaking at the end is that many things have already been. Once again, dear Volodymyr, it was an honor to once again have you and your team on Swedish soil just a few weeks ago, together with the presidents and prime minister of the Nordic countries, supporting Ukraine in exercising its inherent right to self-defense is now Sweden's main foreign policy priority. The disadvantage of speaking at the end is that many things have already been said. The advantage is to have heard what others have wanted to say. We come from different countries with different experiences, but I believe that all of us in here are united on one conviction. We can never accept the aggression as a means of achieving political objectives. And to our partners from outside of Europe, I want to give my most heartfelt thank you for being here and for your readiness to engage. We hear what you are saying also about other conflicts of the world. I hope that you hear what countries closer geographically to Russia, such as mine, say about what is at stake. I will never, ever forget the words of a young Ukrainian soldier that I had the opportunity to meet in Kiev, who had served for the 79th Air Assault Brigade at the front, lost his legs, had his leg amputated just a few weeks ago before we met. His name is Alexander. And he looked me straight into the eye and he said, "Remember this, Putin will not stop at Ukraine." And I say this with some weight, having Russia as a neighbor. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine led us to reassess our own policy of 2 centuries and seek, together with Finland, the reassurance of membership in NATO. That's a major change for a country as Sweden, but a necessary one and a direct result of Russia's illegal, unprovoked, and indefensible war of aggression. We want peace, but we want a just peace, a peace that does not embolden an imperialistic Russia, not a peace that will lead to renewed conflict, but a peace that can actually hold. A united world has to be stronger than one single aggression. We're at a crossroads where it's weighing either rule of law or rule of violence. We remain firm in our commitment to finding peace. The path to peace looks like a narrow, a complicated one, but I would like to finish off by saying this. Putin can be the bearer of peace tomorrow. Bring the children back home to Ukraine. Call back the troops to Russia. Slava Ukraini. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Prime Minister. And now it's my pleasure to hand over the floor to the President of Kosovo, Vjosa Osmani.
Thank you, dear President Ahmed, dear President Zelensky, colleagues. Throughout history, the glory of humankind has been defined by the resilient, the brave, and those who, in the face of overwhelming odds, never surrendered. But it is especially shaped by those who, with unwavering conviction, believed in the power of peace and the enduring strength of our shared humanity. These individuals remind us that our greatest triumphs come not from might, but from our ability to foster hope, compassion, and unity. Only 2 decades after the war in Kosovo, where the world came together to our rescue and sent a clear message of never again, through a clear moral compass, the Russian aggression against Ukraine has reminded everyone in my country of 2 things. First, of the horrendous and unimaginable suffering that the war brings, and second, that now it is our turn to give back. Since February 22, the world witnessed an aggression that not only threatens the sovereignty of a nation, but also the very soul of Europe. But Ukraine will prevail, because there is nothing and no one that can stand on the way of a people that wants to be free. The people of Ukraine have lit up a fire of hope that no tyranny will ever be able to extinguish. As a nation that was devastated by the suffering of war, I want to point out that this moment demands that we stand firm, ensuring that our commitment is measured not in days or months, but in the steadfastness of our support until Ukraine's sovereignty is restored and just peace prevails. This fight is not merely Ukraine's fight. It is the battle for our shared values and the ideals that today are under siege, but are as enduring as the spirit of those who defend them. We've offered Ukraine support in all fronts, from the human dimension to military aid. But let's not forget that the echoes of conflict do not fade with the silencing of guns. They linger in the minds and hearts of those touched by its horrors. This is why we're committed to not just relief, but also to recovery and resilience, supporting Ukraine in its moment of need and far beyond. Recovery doesn't just mean rebuilding the buildings, but also the human spirit of those who suffered most. Because even decades after, you will see the pain in the eyes of the mothers of the children forcibly disappeared, of the survivors of the sexual violence, of those who lost their families for the war. But to give up now would be not just to forsake the people of Ukraine, but to forsake the very ideals that we have pledged to uphold. And as we support Ukraine, let's make sure that we do not do that by rewarding the aggressor, because that would mean revisioning history. Colleagues, 25 years ago, I was a child of war, deported from her house, hiding from the shelling of the aggressor in the mountains, holding a little radio in my hand, listening alongside many other children, while leaders like yourselves were discussing whether to come to our rescue or not. Later on, I became a refugee. But you did come to our rescue. Your countries did not turn a blind eye to our suffering. You came to our rescue, and you gave me a chance to come back now, 25 years after, and thank you for becoming our saviors. I hope you give that same chance to the children of Ukraine. Thank you.
Madam President, thank you very much. Now I invite the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Maria Pejcinovic-Buric, to make her contribution. No? You don't want? No problem. Let's go ahead. May I give the floor to the Secretary of the Security Council of Armenia, Armen Grigoryan? No, not at all. Then the next one will be the United Arab Emirates. I'm pleased to invite the diplomatic advisor to the President of the United Arab Emirates, Anwar Gargash, to give his intervention.
President Amherd, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the President of the United Arab Emirates, I would like to thank the Swiss Federation for their leadership in convening this conference. The UAE believes that diplomacy remains the only viable way to end the war in Ukraine. We are concerned about the risk of further escalation and the resulting strain on the international order. We are facing a growing number of local and regional wars and crises, and we need to reduce tensions and reassert the central role of peaceful diplomacy and mediation in line with the principles of the UN Charter. To that end, the UAE continues to communicate with all parties in the war in Ukraine. We also share the international community's deep concerns about the repercussions of the current situation on civilians in and out of Ukraine. Since the beginning of the Ukrainian crisis, the UAE has sent 14 aircraft to Poland, Moldova, and Bulgaria, carrying more than 1,000 tons of food, medical supplies, and ambulances as part of our emergency relief efforts to assist Ukrainian civilians. We have also provided large numbers of power generators to help alleviate the effect of attacks on the power grid. In this context, I would also like to reiterate calls for parties to the conflict to respect humanitarian personnel and operations and to respect international humanitarian law, particularly the special protections accorded by the Geneva Conventions. Looking to the future, I would like to note ongoing efforts by the UAE and Ukraine to deepen trade ties and conclude a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. Aid is important and urgently needed at this time. At the same time, we need to strengthen the Ukrainian economy and enable the private sector to rebuild the country. However, the long-term outlook for the Ukrainian economy remains bleak if we cannot bring the war to a negotiated settlement. The failure of diplomacy up until now has dramatically increased global polarization, with serious long-term consequences for global peace and stability. The UAE believes that the success of the diplomatic efforts like this summit contributes to creating positive momentum that the international community can build upon to reach a resolution. In this context, I would like to draw your attention to the war and the unspeakable suffering of the besieged population in Gaza. Principles of international law and international humanitarian law have to be applied evenly and consistently. Double standards only play into the hands of those who want to do away with these standards. In spite of the many false starts and setbacks in diplomatic efforts and attempts at mediation, there also have been some notable successes, such as our contribution to prisoner exchanges in Ukraine. I believe we can draw hope from these successes. In this context, I would like to underline the need for the Russian Federation to become part of efforts such as this summit to find a negotiated settlement, a settlement that is in line with the principles of international law, respect for the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of all states. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. I'm now pleased to invite the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uruguay, Omar Paganini, to share his thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, Uruguay has based its international policy since our early times on the principles of respect for territorial integrity, sovereignty, and peaceful solution of controversies. This may seem obvious, but it is especially significant for comparatively small countries, and it is the only way to sustain peace in the world today. Since the outbreak of the war in February 2022, Uruguay has been emphatic and active in stating its position as a defender of multilateralism and international law. We have supported the UN General Assembly's resolutions on the Russian aggression on Ukraine. We have been vocal, expressing our non-recognition of the instruments of annexation of the temporary occupied territories of Ukraine. We have engaged in the path initiated by President Zelensky, Zelensky's calling and participated in the previous meeting that brought us here today. The number of high-level delegations present here shows the past has been a resounding success. As has been said, the impact of this war has gone much farther than the directly involved countries, so the engagement of the international community is mandatory, but moreover, because basic principles are at stake here. Uruguay supports the outcome of this summit and will continue to stand on the side of peace based on the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. To finish, we want to express our recognition to the Swiss government for the organization of this very remarkably successful summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. I'm now delighted to hand over the floor to the President of Albania, Bayram Begay.
Dear Madam President Amher, dear President Zelensky, first let me thank you for organizing this summit and for your hospitality. Second, Albania is honored to participate and fully support this summit. This summit represents a vital gathering of nations united by the common goal of forging a path out of the darkness of conflict into the light of peace. The Russian aggression against Ukraine has resulted in devastating loss, destruction, and displacement. This human tragedy compels us to prioritize the peace process not as a distant idol, but as an immediate imperative. It's our responsibility to pave the way toward peace, ensuring that each step taken is a step away from war and conflict. Russian aggression is a blatant breach of core principles of UN Charter, a flagrant violation of international laws, and a threat for peace and security in the European continent and beyond. Our challenge is monumental: to develop a framework for a future peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. It's imperative that these nations coexist peacefully within the internationally recognized borders. Albania has strongly condemned the Russian aggression. We maintain a clear position in defense of territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine. Albania considers the President Zelensky peace formula the way to restore just and long-lasting peace for Ukraine. Any peace process must be driven by Ukraine. Albania will continue to support Ukraine until peace is achieved, in line with the UN Charter, and must include accountability for Russia's actions. The road to peace should never be a road to surrender. It is instead a path paved with the courage to uphold our values. As we seek a resolution, we must ensure that the support for Ukraine must continue. We gather here not to coerce, but to encourage, not to impose, but to propose paths toward peace that respect the interest and integrity for all. Together, let us transform the hope of today into the peace of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President Begay. Thank you very much. Now I'm pleased to invite President Nikos Christodoulidis of Cyprus to give his intervention.
Dear colleagues, we are all here today to reiterate once again that Ukraine is not alone. This broad participation of leaders reflects our strong commitment for lasting peace in Ukraine, for lasting peace in the European continent, in a time where the perception that peace is given has crumbled. Our presence here today aims also to highlight the great respect of the international community towards the heroic, brave and resilient Ukrainians. Today, we'll all actively and collectively substantiate that our solidarity and support to both Ukraine and its people, as well as towards establishing a just and sustainable peace, remain solid, far-reaching and unified. Dear friends, Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine
Russia's illegal invasion to Ukraine has caused unthinkable consequences for the country and immeasurable loss of its people. It also led to devastating regional and global repercussions. Russia's actions have endangered food security for millions of people across the globe. It is therefore crucially important to keep shipping channels open so that Ukraine exports its products, making it adamantly clear that food security must in no way be weaponized. An additional tragic humanitarian aspect of this war are the captives, prisoners of war, and the Ukrainian children forcibly deported to Russia. A generation of Ukrainian children has experienced fear, loss, tragedy, violence, both physical and psychological, for more than 2 years. Today, we reiterate our determination and persistence to act. Dear colleagues, this war must come to an end. Illegality stemming from invasion, occupation, and use of force will never be tolerated or recognized. We remain at Ukraine's side, assisting all just efforts for a lasting peace in the country. At the same time, our respect for the inviolability of borders, the territorial integrity and independence of all states is unconditional for all nations across the world. I truly hope that today's summit will pave the way for a meaningful dialogue on a results-oriented platform that will eventually set a path towards a comprehensive peace based on international law and the core principles of the UN Charter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. I now announce the President of North Macedonia, Gordana Silanovska-Davkova.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, first of all, my sincere congratulations on the successful organization of this Summit for Peace. It was not an easy feat, and you should be satisfied and proud to have gathered so many countries in one place for such a noble cause. Ukraine is a burning issue not only for Europe, but for the entire world. The fact that I am representing my country at the highest level today is another confirmation of our principled position and firm support for the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Let me repeat that this war affects us all. Ukraine undergoes massive human suffering and destruction. Europe's security architecture is under threat. Globally, the lives of millions of people are affected by the grave economic consequences. We have gathered here in Switzerland to help Ukraine navigate the road from unjust war to a just peace. We condemned Russian unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression in the strongest possible way, and we supported Ukraine in the best way we can. I want to stress several items at the end. While we support Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic aspirations, and we have sent military equipment through NATO's comprehensive assistance package. And the question we are facing now is how can we help Ukraine not only end the unjust war, but also achieve a just and principled peace. First, as a sovereign nation, only Ukraine can decide for its own future. Second, a just peace must be rooted in the UN Charter principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia's attempt to acquire territory by force is a flagrant violation of basic tenets. When dangerous precedents go uncontested, they can turn into tolerated practices. Compromises with international law and principles can threaten European and even world peace and security. The only way to avoid this is to respect the UN Charter and the principles of international law without exception. Refraining from the use of force, respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity and inviolability of borders, and protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms are non-negotiable principles. This last, since unpunished crimes can breed more crime, a just peace should include accountability. While the development of the framework for a future peace agreement is undergoing, we will continue to support a free, independent, democratic and sovereign Ukraine. My last sentence. I remember the question arisen by Hemingway, for whom the bell tolls. My short answer is, for us, not only as the responsible politicians, but also as human beings. Thank you.
Thank you, President. I'm now pleased to announce the address from Rosemary DiCarlo, Under Secretary General of the United Nations.
President Ahmed, President Zelensky, the United Nations is pleased to join this meeting as an observer. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has maintained a clear and consistent stance. Russia's invasion of Ukraine violates the United Nations Charter and international law and has caused immense suffering to the people of Ukraine. Further, UN General Assembly resolutions have supported the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Many voices during this meeting have stressed the need to adhere to the principles of the UN Charter. These principles are as valid today as they were in 1945. Excellencies, since the start of the war, the UN has worked with the Ukrainian government and civil society to mitigate the war's impact, particularly on the most vulnerable. This year, thanks to the generosity of donors, we've provided life-saving assistance to 4.4 million people. While the humanitarian needs set to grow due to escalating hostilities, sustained support to the 2024 Ukraine Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan remains essential. The United Nations is also engaged in the areas discussed in detail during this summit: the human dimension, nuclear security, and food security. This summit has served as a valuable opportunity to discuss efforts towards peace, and as such, it can help lay the groundwork for a future process to end this horrific war. At the United Nations, we are ready to support all initiatives toward a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace in Ukraine that are based on the UN Charter, international law, and relevant resolutions of the General Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. May I hand over the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, Alicia Barcena.
Thank you very much. I thank President Viola Amherd and Federal Counsel Ignacio Cassis for hosting this important summit. Greetings from President Andrés Manuel López Obrador of Mexico. We come here to exchange ideas on the pathways towards a comprehensive, lasting, and peaceful solution, which we would like to say that this war in Europe is posing an existential security threat, not only for Europe, but for the global community as a whole. It is time then, because we in the Global South are suffering also the consequences related to food security, energy, and of course, it is time, we believe, to advocate for peace and not war. Mexico is here to reiterate its long-standing commitment with all the fundamental principles of the UN Charter and the respect for international law and for sovereignty and territorial integrity. We are against violent invasions and aggressions, including diplomatic facilities. Although several peace initiatives have been presented, none seems to have gathered the universal international support needed to be successful. On the contrary, we are seeing an escalation, and more deployment of arms and military equipment at the expense of the suffering of civilians, particularly women and children. Mexico has repeatedly called for the solving of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict through negotiation, mediation, dialogue, and diplomacy, and less armamentism. Mexico has been at the front line in the battle for disarmament and nuclear security. Tlatelolco Treaty is an example of that. We are deeply concerned about the nuclear security and the threats that are emerging in the context of this war. We unequivocally condemn any threat to the use of nuclear weapons under any circumstances, and we call urgently for the preservation of the integrity of the nuclear facilities in Ukraine. The permanent members of the Security Council have an historical responsibility to uphold the UN Charter and to avoid irresponsible actions that endanger peace. All parties involved we are very concerned about the proliferation of weapons in Europe, and we believe that we must avoid that many of these arms are diverted to the illegal market and falls into the hands of non-state actors fueling their criminal acts. Let me tell you that we support four things. Number one, first, it's imperative that we devote diplomatic efforts for the Russian Federation to be included in this discussion. Second, we must bring the peace process under the umbrella of the United Nations. Third, agreements and gradual negotiated steps should be considered to build confidence. And fourth, Mexico is following closely the work of the International Criminal Court entrusted to investigate Russian attacks in Ukraine energy infrastructure. We all agree with me that the world cannot resist the protracted conflict. Finally, we cannot be talking about peace, and here we join South Africa, without mentioning other humanitarian tragedies as the one taking place in Gaza. International law and the UN Charter must be respected in every case, otherwise we will end up in a similar situation than the world was in 1939. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Minister. May I now hand over to His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomeus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. War is always destructive. To remain silent in front of the cruelty of war is a shame. It is our duty and mission to defend and promote peace. Blessed are the peacemakers. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, dear sisters and brothers. It is therefore at once an honor and an obligation to attend this summit on peace in Ukraine, initiated by Her Excellency President Viola Amherd of the Swiss Confederation in partnership with His Excellency President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. The driving force behind this summit has been the emphasis on and the power of dialogue. Dialogue across all borders of nations and all levels of society, beyond state and political interests, as well as in collaboration with corporate and security concerns. This includes cultural, but above all, religious and spiritual dimensions. This is precisely why, on the 5th of January 2019, in response to the pastoral needs of the Orthodox faithful in Ukraine, the Ecumenical Patriarchate established the Orthodox Church of Ukraine as an autocephalous or self-governing ecclesiastical entity, independent of the Patriarchate of Moscow. And we did this against all odds and at all costs, because we firmly believe that the Orthodox Christians in Ukraine deserve an ecclesiastical voice of their own. We stand here, all of us, in support of a just and lasting peace in a sovereign Ukraine. May God grant rest to all those who have tragically lost their lives and give strength to all those who defend peace. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your All Holiness. It is my pleasure to hand over to the Secretary of State of the Holy See, His Eminence Cardinal Pietro Parolin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, dear participants, the Holy See welcomes the convening of this high-level summit on peace for Ukraine, co-hosted by Switzerland and Ukraine. This is an event of global importance, carefully prepared by Ukraine, which, while making enormous efforts to defend itself from aggression, has also worked continuously on the diplomatic front, eager to achieve a just and lasting peace. In the face of war and its tragic consequences, it is important never to give up, but to continue to seek ways to end the conflict with good intentions, trust, and creativity. This is the message Pope Francis conveys, particularly to the rulers of nations, with his ongoing appeals for peace in Ukraine. It is important to reiterate that the only means capable of achieving true, stable, and just peace is dialogue between all the parties involved. The Holy See expresses its hope that the diplomatic effort currently being promoted by Ukraine and supported by so many countries will be improved in order to achieve the result that the victims deserve and that the entire world is hoping for. In accordance with its nature, the Holy See is participating as an observer, paying particular attention to the respect for international law and humanitarian issues. With regard to the first aspect, it wishes to reaffirm the validity of the fundamental principle of respect for the sovereignty of each country and for the integrity of its territory. The Holy See expresses great concern from the tragic humanitarian consequences and is especially committed to facilitating the repatriation of children and encouraging the release of prisoners, especially seriously wounded soldiers and civilians. The reunification of minors with their families or legal guardians must be a paramount concern for all parties, and any exploitation of their situation is unacceptable. It is therefore imperative that every available channel is strengthened to facilitate this process. In addition, the Holy See participates as an observer in the work of the International Coalition for the Repatriation of Ukrainian Children from Russia. Furthermore, it maintains direct contact with both the Ukrainian and Russian authorities with the aim of enhancing the effectiveness of the ad hoc mechanism created following the visit of Cardinal Matteo Zuppi to Kiev and Moscow with a view to resolving concrete cases. With regard to prisoners,
both civilian and military, there is a great of concern over the periodic reports of non-compliance with the Geneva Conventions, in particular about the Fourth Convention, which most directly concerns civilians, and the difficulty of creating, together with the International Red Cross Committee, a joint medical commission that could assess the situation of prisoners of war in need of urgent medical care. Despite of all challenges, the Holy See remains committed to maintaining regular communication with the Ukrainian and Russian authorities and remains prepared to assist in the implementation of potential mediation initiatives that are acceptable to all parties and benefit those who have been affected. At the same time, the Holy See encourages countries and other members of the international community to explore ways of providing assistance and facilitating mediation, whether of humanitarian or political nature. We trust that by supporting these efforts, we can help us find consensus and ensure the timely implementation of these projects. On behalf of Pope Francis, I wish to confirm his personal closeness to the tormented Ukrainian people and this unwavering commitment to peace. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Eminence. I am now pleased to invite the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Slovak Republic, Juraj Blanar, to give his address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, dear Excellencies, dear participants. First of all, I would like to commend and thank to our Swiss colleague for hosting this important event. Our Prime Minister, Robert Fico, who was supposed to be here today, is not present because of terrible assassination attempt a month ago. So let me convey his personal regards to all participants as he is closely watching the outcomes. Today I would like to deliver 3 key points. Firstly, war against Ukraine is raging on European soil, but it has a far-reaching global implication. No viable solution is thus possible without the global players engaged constructively in the name of UN-centered international law and order. Adherence of international law is crucial importance for maintaining peace all around the globe. For such a small country like Slovakia is especially important. Secondly, the key principles defined by the UN Charters and the Helsinki Final Act are indispensable and must be integrated into the political platform like this, driving the peace efforts toward the more concrete future peace plan tabled when conditions are ripe. In the meantime, critical issues like protection of civilians, exchange of war prisoners, return of hostages, freedom of navigation, nuclear safety, etc., need to be efficiently addressed. Slovakia is especially deeply concerned with the security of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant and fully support the IAEA's effort to implement basic security safeguards and to monitor its operations. To this end, the Slovak government has supported IAEA work with the financial means. Thirdly, Ukraine must survive to become peaceful, independent, sovereign and democratic country with stable, international recognized borders and firmly on its path towards the European Union membership. To join Slovak-Ukraine government session held in this year have confirmed that and produced the roadmap focusing on strategic infrastructure and connectivity, for instance, to help Ukraine with the more and more frequent power outages. Slovakia continues to provide large volume of electricity. Since April 2024, more than 40,000 megawatt hours have been delivered, and we will stand ready to provide more. Ladies and gentlemen, Their Excellencies, Slovakia is around this table because we want to support every peace initiatives, but it is necessary to have all stakeholders involved in the process. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Minister. May I now hand over to the National Security Advisor of the United States of America, Jake Sullivan.
President Amherd, President Zelensky, thank you for hosting this summit, and more than that, congratulations on a tremendous success in this summit. You have gathered 100 countries and institutions from all parts of the world, all regions, representing people from everywhere, and showing that there is broad and deep support for a just peace. More than that, though, what this summit has done is define what the core character, the core foundation of that just peace looks like. And that is the principles of the United Nations Charter, the principles of international law, the notion of sovereignty and territorial integrity, and the basic proposition that no nation should be allowed to conquer another nation by force, period. And that has created a platform upon which Ukraine can stand going forward to negotiate from a position of confidence to secure its sovereignty and territorial integrity and to secure the just peace that the people of Ukraine deserve. And even beyond that, the working groups today gave momentum to the practical steps that we all need to take together on food security, nuclear security, and of course the return of abducted children and the monstrous act of abducting those children, taking them from their homes and families must be rectified, and those children must be returned. What is most interesting in watching these last 2 days is the split screen of this weekend with what we heard from President Putin as he laid out his vision for peace a couple of days ago, where he said, not only does Ukraine have to give up the territory Russia currently occupies, but Ukraine has to leave additional sovereign Ukrainian territory before Russia will negotiate. And Ukraine must disarm so that it is vulnerable to future Russian aggression down the road. No responsible nation can say that is a reasonable basis for peace. It defies the UN Charter, it defies basic morality, it defies basic common sense. By contrast, the vision of peace that was put forward here today from so many different countries, rooted in principles all of us signed up to, rooted in principles all of us would like to live in a world that are ruled by those principles because they make us all safe. This is the right vision as we go forward. And so this summit, from our perspective, is a critical milestone on a path towards a just peace, and the United States of America will proudly walk with Ukraine along that path until Ukraine prevails and peace prevails. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give over the floor to Mr. Luis Almagro, Secretary General of the Organization of American States.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here and participate in the summit on peace for Ukraine. I thank the Swiss government for this invitation. I fully agree with the fundamental premises of this meeting. Ethically, we shall always support attempts for peace. Peace is an ethical project, and we shouldn't have any dilemma about it. No moral dilemma about freedom, or about sovereignty, or about territorial integrity or self-determination, or about condemnation of aggression. No moral dilemma about working for peace. No moral dilemma about human rights violations or crimes against humanity. It's about principles, and it's about survival. It is about our work in order to preserve the rule of law internationally. The law of the strongest cannot be accepted. the peace always has to be just. Russia is a great country with a great history, great culture. Tolstoy, Solzhenitsyn, Sakharov, Marina, Tsvetaeva. So Russia, to honor their greatness, has to stop sucking the blood of this war. It has been already enough for the whole world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to the Prime Minister of Cabo Verde, José Ulises Correia e Silva.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, this summit is a timely initiative. It's timely because it's always important to seek best paths to peace. Cabo Verde firmly supports the international order based on the UN Charter and international law. Cabo Verde defends respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. It's based on these principles that from the outset we condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And we maintain our position consistently. This war caused death and destruction. This war is a threat to global security and the stability of the world economy. The least developed countries are those that suffer most from the impacts of the global economic and food security crisis. The escalation of inflation and the disruption of food supply chains caused by the war are examples of these impacts. The breakdown of the Partnership for Development caused by the war effort is another impact that could worsen. Therefore, the war in Ukraine is not indifferent to any country in the world. Due to the values at stake and the consequence of the war, it is important to fight for peace. We hope that this summit will be a strong step towards a lasting and just peace. Together, we are stronger. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm now pleased to invite the President of Latvia, Edgar Rinkēvičs, to take the floor.
Thank you very much, and first of all, thank you, Switzerland and Ukraine, for all the hard work you have done to convene this summit. I do believe that this is the first step in a very long way towards the peace, but I think that the spirit that we have heard and seen yesterday and today is the right one. I do believe also that we as the international community must work out a comprehensive roadmap to the peace, but at least two elements are critical here. First, Russia must withdraw all its armed forces from Ukraine's territory, and Ukraine's territorial integrity must be restored within its internationally recognized borders. We have discussed a lot about the food security, nuclear safety, humanitarian aspects of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. I think that those three elements actually affect all of us, and I do believe that it is our responsibility to address them in the most serious way. I had my own experience being in Ukraine when the war started on 21st of February 2022. I saw the horror of the first hours. I saw people fleeing, and I think that those memories will be with me throughout the whole life. But I also believe that we are seeing, and many of colleagues have mentioned here, children who have been abducted by Russian Federation, the children who, when they visit our countries, when they have a couple of nights without air alerts, without bombing or drones overflying, they are regaining their childhood. And I think that it is very important that we continue, while we are talking about the peace, addressing the real issues also on humanitarian side. Also, one thing that I want to particularly mention is I'm coming from the country, Latvia, that has history of the Soviet occupation and colonialism. What we see in Ukraine today is what many of countries here present have seen also in the past. Russia is the country that is launching colonial war, And I think that it is also very important that we look at this war from this aspect. Finally, I do believe that we need to work further, and this summit is the first step when now we have the world's community's support to work out the comprehensive roadmap and to continue in the very good spirit that we have seen all here also in the future. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you so much. And finally, it's my pleasure to hand over the floor to the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau.
President Umherd, President Zelensky, thank you for asking Canada to close these interventions from the floor. And thank you for bringing us all together for this important and successful summit. It is a summit on peace in Ukraine, but it is not just about Ukraine. It is about whether or not the global community will stand up for international law and the rules-based order that protects us all. Canada will always be a strong voice for democracy, freedom, and peace, and standing up for international law and the rules-based order. This is why we keep supporting Ukraine. Our work all together during this summit has helped shape a joint vision of a peace framework based on the UN Charter and international law. We will continue to uphold the fundamental principles embedded in the UN Charter. Before coming to Switzerland, I was in Italy for the G7, where we took significant actions to keep supporting Ukraine, primarily with the major G7 loans to help pay for the damage caused by Russia. When a just and sustainable peace comes, we will all be there to help Ukraine rebuild. What's good about buildings is that they can be rebuilt. But the people who lost their lives, the families destroyed, they won't be able to bring them back. That's the most painful consequence of war, the human suffering. As Volodymyr pointed out last night, today in many, many countries around the world, it's Father's Day. This evening, many of us will be home with our kids. Not everyone is so lucky. Ukraine, thousands of kids have been taken from their families, their home, their communities. Ukraine says that close to 20,000 children were taken by Russia. We've recently seen reports of Ukrainian children being listed on Russian adoption websites. They're being forced to forget their identity as Ukrainians. I think we all know the consequence of removing children from their language, their culture, their families, their identity. It's a form of colonialism that the world cannot abide by. Earlier today, I co-chaired a working session on the human dimension of this war to work towards bringing kids home to their families. And Canada's announcing $15 million in funding to support the reintegration of displaced children returning to Ukraine through improved child protection services and family-based care options. Ukrainian kids belong in their schools, their playgrounds, and their communities. This funding will also improve access to justice for survivors of war crimes, among other measures. This illegal war by Russia needs to end. Humanitarian law and the UN Charter must be respected. We have to keep sending strong signals that our solidarity with Ukraine is as strong as ever and will not fade. Russian aggression has to stop. It won't be easy, but as a dad, I hope that we can all get to a just and sustainable peace in the next year so that Ukrainian kids and families can celebrate Father's Day together, but also that people and families everywhere around the world are able to know that international law and the rules-based order will be defended and upheld by all countries in the world. This is how we protect each other. This is how we protect future generations. This is how we keep the world on the right track. Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava, Glory to Ukraine, glory to its heroes.
Community has the desire to bring change. The high-level participation of your states and organizations has enabled us to launch a broad dialogue and develop common ideas on the path to a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. During many conversations, I also sensed approval for this approach and a strong desire to see that happen. This weekend, here at Bürgenstock, we have carried out important groundwork. On the issues of nuclear safety, food security, and the human dimension of the war, we have agreed that steps to build trust are possible. I was very impressed by the ideas and points of view presented in the working groups. I would therefore like to thank the chairpersons for their work. With the Bürgenstock communiqué, we have established a framework around which further discussions should take place. These are the concrete goals we have set ourselves and which we all work towards. Firstly, any use of nuclear energy and nuclear installations must be safe, secured, safeguarded and environmentally sound. Secondly, food security must not be weaponized in any way. Attacks on merchant ships in ports and along the entire route, as well as against civilian ports and civilian port infrastructures, are unacceptable. Thirdly, all prisoners of war must be released by complete exchange. All deported and unlawfully displaced Ukrainian children and all other Ukrainian civilians who were unlawfully detained must be returned to Ukraine. One key question remains: how and when can Russia be included in the process? We have heard it in many of your statements. A lasting solution must involve both parties. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the discussions over the past 2 days have shown that there are different points of view. All the more important is our understanding that the path towards peace in Ukraine must be pursued on the basis of international law and, in particular, the United Nations Charter. Further steps are needed to achieve that goal. Switzerland is ready to continue to play an active role in this process of dialogue. I am confident that we will all commit ourselves to this process beyond the Bürgerstock and in the knowledge that the road ahead is long and challenging. Switzerland will continue to be a committed partner. The international community is familiar with the tradition of my country and its good offices. The world can be sure that we will continue to work for peace in Ukraine, just as we have done this weekend. I would like to thank you most sincerely for everything that you and your states have achieved. And I would also like to thank everyone who has worked on preparing and making this conference possible. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the summit. In the name of the Swiss Federal Council, it is now my pleasure to invite you all to proceed to the informal standing lunch that concludes the summit on peace in Ukraine. Thank you very much.